Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Today, it gets crazy. So we've been talking about tensions in the United States in the 1800s over the issues of slavery and how those tensions rise. Well, today, it gets violent. Let's just jump into it. So it's all going to start with this thing called the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Kansas-Nebraska Act sounds, if you're just looking at the words of it, just seems a relatively boring act. Stuff gets crazy, like movie level crazy here, that is shocking not only to society at the time, but even learning about it. You're like, wait, what happened? How'd this get out of control so quick? So there is this act that gets passed called the Kansas-Nebraska Act. What it does is it says, hey, Kansas and Nebraska, they can decide for themselves whether they want to be a slave state or a free state. There's a big fancy word called popular sovereignty. So you see on the map right here in the middle, the big purple areas in the middle, you see Nebraska territory, Kansas territory. The areas around it, like California, had already voted to become states. They're already part of the United States. Well, obviously, if you have states on both sides, you want all the areas in the middle to also be states. So there's not really people that live here in Kansas or Nebraska permanently, not a big enough population to typically warrant going ahead and making them a state. But because we want to connect both sides, the idea of manifest destiny spread out everywhere. We also obviously don't want, for some reason, that to not be a state if we're going from one side of the country to another. So Kansas and Nebraska are going to be states with the three people that live there, all right? Now, what's really weird with the Kansas and Nebraska Act is they are allowed popular sovereignty, meaning they can decide for themselves whether or not they want to be a slave state or a free state. That's going to cause a huge issue because up to this point, the Missouri Compromise has been the rule everybody went with, and that is that 3630 line. That's the top of North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, Texas, goes all the way across the country. If you are below that line, you can have slaves. If you are above that line, you must be a free state. Well, Kansas and Nebraska are both above the 3630 line. By allowing Kansas and Nebraska to choose whether they want slavery or not, all right, it basically nullifies the Missouri Compromise already, throws that out. Now, if Kansas votes to have slavery, not only is this yet another slave state that the North can't stand, it is allowing the expansion of slavery into the northern half of the country, which completely infuriates the people that are anti-slavery, because the argument against slavery, not only is it immoral and evil, the battleground is actually the expansion of slavery. Do not let slavery expand. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, depending on how Kansas votes, could allow Kansas to expand slavery further north. A lot of tension here over the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and it gets insane, all right, with the story. But the question here is, before we move on, why was the Kansas-Nebraska Act such a hot point on the issue of slavery? Explain how it, meaning the Kansas-Nebraska Act, violates the Missouri Compromise. So pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. So this is also the time a new political party comes out. It's very important because it's the political party that we have today is the Republican Party. So the two political parties we have present day, the Democrats and Republicans. The Democrats at this point in history had already been created with Andrew Jackson when he became president. So the Democrats are typically Southern farmers, agriculture, and therefore Democrats at the time typically supported slavery. If you were not a Democrat, you didn't have a lot of choices on what political party that you were going to be in. You could be a Whig, which was what Zachary Taylor's political party was. Is this kind of a holdover from a European concept. it wasn't very effective. It wasn't very popular. You could have been a know-nothing, but know-nothings basically refused to talk about slavery. That's why they're called know-nothings, is they wouldn't talk about anything unless it's slavery. Those were pretty much your options. You could be a Democrat, but if you're a Democrat and you don't like slavery, you don't really have a choice, because the Democrats overall support slavery. So a new political party gets formed, and it's called the Republican Party. They are unhappy with either the Whigs or slavery in general, and the political party, the Republicans, come out. Republicans come out, one of their main platforms, if not the number one platform for them, is do not let slavery expand. They're not going in and telling Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, North Carolina, you can no longer have slaves. They're not trying to abolish slavery. They would love for that to happen. That seems like an impossibility. They just want to keep this institution, this evil institution, from spreading any further than it already has. So the Republicans come out at this time because they are adamantly opposed to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This is the first anti-slavery political party with widespread support in the United States. So the Republicans come out directly opposed to Democrats, who now, anybody that was an anti-slavery Democrat will join the Republicans. So now it's basically the Republicans who are against slavery, and so therefore the majority of Republicans are going to be in the North against the Democrats, who are the majority in the South, who support slavery. So the question here is, describe specifically what the Republicans' views on slavery at the time were, all right, and what they hope to accomplish. So pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. All right. So let's talk about this Kansas vote for slavery. Man, I know the story in my brain, and I have to prepare myself to tell the story, cause it's crazy. So, nobody lives in Kansas. That's the issue with Kansas is nobody lives there, but they're going to vote, and basically whichever way Kansas votes basically dictates the expansion of slavery from there on. Is it going to spread north? Is it not? So it is an extremely important vote. The problem is, nobody actually lives in Kansas to vote. So who's going to make this vote? A whole bunch of crazy people. That's who's going to make the vote, because there's a whole bunch of people that are going to flood into Kansas at the time to cast this vote. All right? People, Democrats from the South and neighboring Missouri, which, if you remember from the Missouri Compromise, Missouri was a slave state. So people from Missouri will come into Kansas. All right? I'll hop over to this right here, and then I'll go back. They will come in from the state on their right, on the east. Missouri people will come into Kansas, hoping to cast a vote in Kansas to make it a slave state. Well, there's a bunch of people that come into Kansas from the north. All right, these are probably Republicans already that had already switched officially to the party. These people call themselves free soilers, sometimes just called the Free Soil Party, which would have been part of the Republican Party, which is against the expansion of slavery. So they're free soilers. So people will flood in from the north to try to vote to not let Kansas be a slave state, while people from the south are flooding in trying to vote for it to be a slave state. Let's go back to this map right here. You see on here there are two cities here. There's a couple. They all kind of have part of the story here. There's Lecompton and there's Topeka. These two areas are two separate capitals that get made in Kansas, right? Because these aren't normal people coming in to Kansas to cast this vote. They're kind of extremist. So the anti-slavery people aren't going to be able to live in the same city with the pro-slavery people, or there'll just be fights all the time. So they make two separate capitals, all right? Topeka, right, is the anti-slavery capital of Kansas, whereas Lecompton is the pro-slavery capital of Kansas. So if you support slavery, you're going to live in Topeka, and if you're pro-slavery, you're going to live in Lecompton. If you're against slavery, you live in Topeka. And a lot of people flood into Kansas awaiting this upcoming vote, in which both of these capitals will vote, and whoever has the most votes, that is the trajectory of what Kansas will be as far as slavery and the trajectory of the country. So there's a lot of tension here. Normal people don't travel across the country for political ideals into the middle of nowhere because there's nothing here. There's no government. There's no nothing. It's just wilderness. Move into the middle of nowhere to cast a political vote. So these are all people of action. Keep that in your mind because it gets crazy real quick. The question here, though, explain why Kansas had two capitals and describe the people that were moving to Lecompton and describe the people that were moving to Topeka. So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. So junk gets crazy fast, all right? So what happens, all right, is there is a newspaper building, all right, that talks trash, all right, about slavery. So the newspaper building is in Topeka. It is an anti-slavery newspaper building, all right, so they don't like slavery. And they constantly talk trash about how awful slavery is and how stupid the people over in Lecompton are. Well, the people in Lecompton, they don't like this. Like, oh, you can't talk trash about me. So one night, a group of people from Lecompton who support slavery sneak over into Topeka, who was against slavery, to this newspaper building. In the middle of the night, there's nobody here at this building. They break in, they trash the building, they destroy the printer, and they set the building on fire, and then scamper back to Lecompton, laughing all the way, like, ha, 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 their whole way back. All right? The next morning, when people in Lecompton, the people in Topeka who are against slavery wake up and see that their newspaper building has been destroyed, they are furious. Furious! They can't believe this has happened. All right? And they are very angry at the people in Lecompton. Enter this dude, John Brown. John Brown came out here. He is an extremist. He is anti-slavery. John Brown hates slavery. He thinks slavery should end immediately and that it's evil. There were other people we've already talked about that felt the same way. William Lloyd Garrison, the writer of The Liberator. All right? Frederick Douglass, escaped slave. Both of these men have met John Brown before. And after 5 minutes of talking to John Brown, said, oh, this dude's like super crazy. All right? John Brown wants to end slavery. A lot of people do. He starts saying some things that concern people. He starts claiming he is God's chosen instrument to end slavery. Oh, okay, that's a little extra. He thinks he has actual conversations with God, like in person. And that's where he starts kind of losing people here. He believes he is like the reincarnation of Moses or the new version of Moses. And he uses the religious references because Moses is who freed the slaves from the Egyptians in the Bible. John Brown thinks it is his responsibility to go free the slaves here. Where he loses people is he is 100% into this concept of just murdering people for the greater good. All right? He thinks that slave owners and people that support slavery are basically demons. I mean, figurative, like in his mind, and therefore they deserve to be murdered. Like he's extreme and is willing to start an insurrection and murder all the people that support slavery. Like, that's where he starts losing William Lloyd Garrison. He loses Frederick Douglass. Like, oh, like, I mean, if it comes to, we don't want to go to violence. We think we can do it peacefully. John Brown's like, no, we're way past that. John Brown has come to Kansas in Topeka, all right? Staunch anti-slavery. And he wakes up that morning and sees that newspaper building has been burned down. And he says, that is the sign from God. It's go time. John Brown and a group of men, he has a bunch of sons in these stories, so his sons roll with John Brown when he goes and does these things. John Brown and his sons roll over not to Lecompton because it's too big of a city, but it's actually next to Lecompton in an area called Lawrence, and specifically of Lawrence, a place called Pottawatomie Creek. When you get this specific, you know this story is getting ready to be crazy. That night after the building gets burned, he goes into this small little settlement of these pro-slavery areas, invades 5 different households, brings the entire family outside, and makes the family watch as he executes the husband of 5 different families. If that's not crazy enough as it is, when I say he executed them, did he bring out and did he shoot them? No. He beheaded them with a broadsword. The men in front of their family because they are evil slavery supporters. And then he goes back to Topeka. The next morning, Lecompton finds out these men have been beheaded in front of their families, and basically Lecompton, just as a herd, comes running out of Lecompton to fight people in Topeka, and Topeka comes running out of Topeka and starts fighting people from Lecompton, and like a little mini civil war takes place in Kansas, and the name for it is called Bleeding Kansas, and it is crazy. These people were just shooting each other, killing each other, stabbing each other, murdering each other. It is absolutely bonkers. Now, if this had happened anywhere else, the federal government comes in and stops it. If it happened in a state, all this fighting is taking place, and there is no state because they haven't voted yet in Kansas on whether it's going to be a slave state or a free state. So it's not a state. So the federal government really has no jurisdiction over this. John Brown becomes extremely famous because of these actions that led to this mini civil war referred to as Bleeding Kansas. And it's crazy because it's very symbolic of the rising tensions in the United States, because the people in the North that hear about John Brown, that he went and executed these men in front of their families, view him as an absolute hero for doing this. Thinks this is the right thing to do. The people in the South view him as a terrorist, that this man is just executing innocent people because of their political beliefs. John Brown is a very divisive person in American history because the North loves him. They write folk songs about him, how awesome this is of what John Brown is doing, and people in the South view him as the devil, and he's absolutely hated. John Brown, while he is alive, to kind of show you how John Brown's not all there. He might be. Maybe he just knows more than we all do. I doubt that. And the reason I say that is when he was alive, he became so famous, the portrait got made of him. Well, he couldn't hire, the best portrait maker ever. He wasn't super rich or anything. It's probably some guy choosing to do it for free. So John Brown is here to get his portrait made. It's like an action shot, and the guy is painting it. And then when he's done, he's like, "Oh, John Brown, I've really messed this up. Let me start over because this is clearly trash. There's no way you would want this." And John Brown's like, "Well, hold on. Let me take a look at it first." And John Brown goes and looks at this portrait of him. And he goes, "No. That's exactly what I want to look like in my portrait. This is the portrait that John Brown personally approved of him, with the Bible in one hand, with the Alpha and Omega symbol, because he thinks he's some type of divine servant, prophet of God. He's got a gun in the other hand. He grows out, the picture I showed you, he was clean shaven. He starts growing out this really big beard because, again, he thinks he's like the new version of Moses who had a beard. So John Brown actually sees this picture. It's been added on later too, but the actual part of him, and he's like, "Nope, I'm good with that." So John Brown is extra and supports the idea of being extra. But the question here is, because there's another story about John Brown that we'll talk about in tomorrow's lesson. We'll come back to him. But at this point, describe the type of person John Brown was and why he was such a divisive person in the United States at the time. So pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. All right. This is, I mean, if the Kansas-Nebraska Act and bleeding Kansas isn't a crazy enough story for you, here's another one. While bleeding Kansas is taking place, Congress is kind of freaking out because they don't really have the authority to go in there and do anything about it, much less like pick a side or know who the good guys or the bad guys are. So Congress, the government, is arguing all the time. All right. Now, the House of Representatives, which is elected by the people, still at this point, the 17th Amendment hasn't been created. The 17th Amendment allows for direct election of senators. So the senators are appointed by the state. Like the people don't even get to elect the senators at this point in history yet. You do present day, but back then the states just appointed the senators. So the Senate is usually the adults around. All right, so there's not a lot of crazy stuff that happened in the Senate. So the fact that this story takes place in the Senate among the adults in the government is even crazier. So here's what happens, all right? Because usually we talk about senators arguing is not exciting. This one is a definite exception to that rule. There's this guy named Charles Sumner, all right? He stands up while this whole bleeding Kansas thing is taking place, and he starts talking trash about slavery. Now, honestly, prior to this, people didn't really want to talk about slavery because it was such a touchy issue in Congress, and they tried to avoid it. Well, now the gloves are off, and people are saying how they feel. So it's on a Friday, and Charles Sumner stands up and gives this long speech about how trash slavery is. Not only does he talk trash about how awful slavery is, all right, but he specifically talks trash about one specific person from South Carolina on how trash that person is. The person Charles Sumner, and again, Charles Sumner is anti-slavery, talks trash about a guy named Andrew Butler. Andrew Butler is a pro-slavery senator from South Carolina. All right. So Charles Sumner talking trash about Andrew Butler, talks about him for hours. Now, the thing you need to know here is Andrew Butler is dead. Andrew Butler has passed away. So Charles Sumner is talking trash about somebody who has died, all right, and can't really sit here and defend himself. But Charles Sumner says this sack of crap is the reason we still have slavery today, and just really digging into and talking trash about the legacy of Andrew Butler, who is dead. What Charles Sumner doesn't know is that Preston Brooks is a senator, and Andrew Butler, again, Andrew Butler's a dead guy. Preston Brooks is Andrew Butler's nephew. So Preston Brooks is the nephew of the dead guy. He is also a senator of South Carolina and cannot believe that Charles Sumner is talking trash about his dead uncle. He just cannot believe it. So, at the end of the day, Preston Brooks is furious. He is so furious that he really wants to go have some words with Charles Sumner. But he's like, no, I have some anger management issues. I'm probably going to do something I regret if I go talk to him right now. So Preston Brooks decides, I'm going to go home and think about this over the weekend because there's no Congress on Saturday or Sunday. So at the end of the day on Friday, Preston Brooks storms out afterwards and he goes home. Now Preston Brooks, as a lot of men did, because it's kind of a classy thing to have, is he had a cane. He's not an old guy, but he had a cane he walked around with. So he goes home one day Saturday, still furious that Charles Sumner had talked trash about his dead uncle. So all day Saturday, he's angry. Sunday, he calms down some, all right? And he's like, all right, but I am going to go tell Charles Sumner Monday morning that I am unhappy with him talking trash about my family. So Monday morning, old Preston Brooks here is going to go have words with Charles Sumner. Now, I don't know how innocent of an attempt this was because he takes with him this guy, Lawrence Keat, who had already been kicked out of the House of Representatives. He basically takes a henchman with him, all right? So when you take a henchman with you that's already not allowed in different parts of the government because he's already acts too crazy already, I should give you a sign that I don't know how innocent Preston Brooks' original attempt to go talk to Charles Sumner actually was. But Preston Brooks walks in to the Senate, first thing Monday morning, walks over to where Charles Sumner is sitting, and says, Senator Sumner. And Charles Sumner, who's sitting at his desk, looks up at him and says, what? That's all it took. Preston Brooks snaps. He grabs his cane that he's carried all the time and just starts beating the living crap out of Charles Sumner, while Lawrence Keat here held back the crowd to not come break up this fight. This is a drawing of this beating. Charles Sumner gets beat to within an inch of his life. He is beat unconscious in a pool of his own blood. And Preston Brooks continues to hit him until he breaks his cane on Charles Sumner. Once he breaks his cane and Charles Sumner's unconscious in a pool of his own blood, Preston Brooks looks up and, Keat has been holding everybody back here. You can see him in the background here of this drawing. Preston Brooks stands up, looks at the Senate, says, I quit, and storms out of the Senate. All right. So if that was the story, that would be good. It gets even crazier. All right. So Charles Sumner doesn't die from this, but he does have brain damage and is never able to fully recover from this beating. So Preston Brooks is sure he's going to get arrested or whatever for this. He doesn't. And South Carolina, in these really pivotal times, that they had to have a senator there. Their senator just quit. So they had to have an immediate election in order to pick a new senator. All right. There's all these different options that you can choose from for the Senate. The only person ever in a Senate that actually won a position by being a write-in candidate is in this situation. So there was candidate A, B, and C that people in South Carolina could vote for. If you didn't want candidate A, B, or C to be the senator, you had a place you could just write in a name. The person who wins gets almost 80% of the vote in South Carolina. And it happens to be a write-in candidate. It wasn't one of the candidates A, B, or C. With 80% of the vote, Preston Brooks is reelected. He wasn't even running. Dude quit. And South Carolina's like, nah, boy, get back in there. And he was like, oh, wow. He thought South Carolina would be mad at him. But South Carolina's like, no, that's exactly, you need to beat him with sticks, absolutely. He is reelected, and he's like, okay, I guess I'll go back to work. So when Preston Brooks shows back up at the Senate after almost beating a man to death, he gets a standing ovation by all the other Democrats, the pro-slavery Democrats, when he walks into the Senate. And his desk, that you have assigned seats in the Senate, he's walking down towards his desk, and everybody's standing up and clapping. He's like, oh, cool, whatever. And notices he gets closer to his desk, there's stuff at his desk. And he gets closer, there's a big pile of stuff at his desk. And he gets up to his desk, and he realizes at his desk, stacked all around his desk, are thousands of canes that have been sent to him by people from around the South. And engraved on each cane, it says, hit him again. The Senate has resorted to beating each other almost to death with sticks. These are the adults of the government. All right. Kansas is in its own little mini civil war, and it's all over slavery. The question here is, explain why the beating of Charles Sumner is such a bad sign for a peaceful resolution to the issue of slavery. When the senators, the adults of America, are resorting to violence, it really doesn't seem to be a process here in which we can resolve the issues in America without violence. And it is a really bad sign that there are no more compromises really attempting to come out, that people are resorting to violence. And when it's happening in the Senate, if it's happening in the Senate, it can happen anywhere else in America, because the Senate is the ones that's supposed to, be the calm, cool, and collected ones. So, answer that completely. That's what I got for you today. And then tomorrow, not shockingly, it gets crazier. All right. See you guys tomorrow.